What happens when a self-made tech millionaire seeking peace stumbles upon a mysterious woman with a dangerous past? Jack Carter, burned out from the relentless demands of success, sets sail across the Mediterranean, only to find his quiet retreat shattered by the enigmatic Emily Turner. Who is she really? Why does she seem to be running from something, or someone? As their romance intensifies, so does the web of secrets surrounding her. Jack is drawn into a perilous adventure where love and trust are put to the ultimate test. But can Jack truly trust Emily? And what deadly secrets lie buried beneath the surface of their idyllic escape? As they race against time and an unseen enemy, one question remains. Will they survive the truth? Dive into the Mediterranean Mirage and uncover the answers, if you dare. Chapter 1. A New Beginning. The Mediterranean Sea stretched out like a shimmering blue canvas beneath the late afternoon sun. Jack Carter stood at the helm of his yacht, the Endeavour, feeling the steady rhythm of the waves beneath his feet. The open water was his sanctuary, a place where the pressures of his fast-paced life in San Francisco seemed a world away. Here, there were no board meetings, no deadlines, no demands. Just the endless expanse of the sea and the promise of peace. Jack had always been driven, the kind of man who thrived on challenges. He had built his tech empire from scratch, starting with nothing but a brilliant idea and an unyielding determination to succeed. Over the years, he had grown his company into one of the most successful in Silicon Valley, amassing wealth and influence beyond his wildest dreams. But success came at a cost. The relentless pursuit of more power, more money, more recognition, had left him feeling hollow, as if he had lost something vital along the way. That was why he had decided to take this trip. For the first time in years, Jack had stepped away from his company, leaving it in the hands of his trusted executives. He needed time to think, to reflect, to rediscover the part of himself that had been buried under layers of ambition and responsibility. And what better place to do that than the Mediterranean, with its tranquil waters and ancient shores? As the Endeavour sliced through the waves, Jack allowed himself to relax. He had been sailing for days now, stopping only briefly at a few ports along the French and Italian coasts. But tonight, something felt different. There was a sense of anticipation in the air, a feeling that something was about to change. In the distance, he spotted the outline of a small island, its rocky cliffs rising sharply from the sea. It was a speck on the map, one of the countless islands that dotted the Mediterranean, but something about it drew him in. He adjusted the course, deciding to anchor off the coast for the night. A few hours ashore might do him some good. Maybe he'd find a quiet spot to have a drink, soak in the atmosphere, and feel a little less like a man running from himself. As the yacht approached the island, Jack's pulse quickened. The village nestled against the cliffs looked like something out of a dream. Whitewashed houses with terracotta roofs, narrow cobblestone streets winding up from a tiny harbor, and the faint twinkle of lights from a hillside taverna. It was the kind of place where time seemed to stand still, where the modern world felt a million miles away. He anchored the Endeavour in a sheltered cove and took a small dinghy to the shore. The village was quiet, almost sleepy, with only a few locals lingering in the square. The scent of grilled fish wafted from the taverna, mingling with the salty sea air. Jack walked up the cobblestone path, feeling the tension in his shoulders ease with each step. As he approached the taverna, he noticed a woman sitting alone at a table outside, her head bent over a notebook. She had long, dark hair that fell in loose waves around her face, and her skin glowed with the warm, golden light of the setting sun. There was something about her, an air of quiet intensity, a magnetic presence that drew him in. Jack hesitated, not wanting to intrude, but as he turned to walk past, she looked up and their eyes met. For a moment, the world seemed to stand still. Her eyes were a deep, stormy blue, like the sea after a tempest, and they held his gaze with an intensity that made his breath catch. "Care to join me?" she asked, her voice low and melodic, with just a hint of an accent he couldn't quite place. Jack was caught off guard by the directness of her invitation, but there was something about her that intrigued him. "Sure," he said, taking a seat across from her. "I'm Jack." "Emily," she replied, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "I'm a travel writer, working on my next piece." "And you?" Jack leaned back in his chair, studying her. There was a confidence about her, but also a hint of vulnerability, as if she was hiding something. "I'm on vacation," he said simply. No need to dive into the details. He'd learned that lesson the hard way. The less people knew about his wealth, the less complicated things got. "A man of mystery," she teased, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "I like that." They talked long into the night, the conversation flowing effortlessly. Emily was charming, witty, and had a way of making Jack forget the world around him. She told him stories of her travels, of the places she'd seen and the people she'd met. But as the hours passed and the taverna began to empty, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Emily than met the eye. Her stories were captivating, but they didn't quite add up. She was evasive about certain details, and when he pressed her, she would skillfully change the subject. Despite his instincts telling him to be cautious, Jack found himself drawn to her. There was a thrill in the mystery, in the unknown, that he hadn't felt in years. Maybe this was what he needed, a break from the predictable, a dive into the unexpected. But as the night wore on and they parted ways, Jack couldn't help but wonder, who was Emily Turner, really? And why did he feel like he'd just stepped into the middle of a story that was far from over? What do you think about the mysterious Emily? Any guesses on what she might be hiding from Jack? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear what you think. And if you enjoyed the start, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what's next. Chapter 2. The Encounter. The next morning, Jack awoke with a sense of anticipation. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a warm golden light over the village. He could hear the distant sound of waves crashing against the rocks and the soft murmur of voices from the harbor. For the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of excitement, as if the day held promise. He dressed quickly and made his way to the taverna, hoping to see Emily again. There was something about her that had captured his attention, something that made him want to know more. He wasn't sure if it was her beauty, her intelligence, or the mystery that seemed to surround her, but whatever it was, he couldn't shake it. When he arrived at the taverna, he found her sitting at the same table as the night before, her notebook open in front of her. She looked up as he approached, a smile spreading across her face. "Good morning," she said, her voice soft and inviting. "Morning," Jack replied, taking a seat across from her. "Mind if I join you?" "Not at all," she said, closing her notebook and setting it aside. "I was hoping you'd come by." They spent the morning talking, sharing stories of their lives and their dreams. Emily was full of surprises, with a sharp wit and a quick mind that kept Jack on his toes. She had a way of making him feel like the only person in the world, as if nothing else mattered but the two of them. As they talked, Jack found himself opening up in a way he hadn't in years. He told her about his childhood in San Francisco, about the challenges he'd faced in building his company, and about the emptiness that had driven him to take this trip. Emily listened intently, her eyes never leaving his, and for the first time, Jack felt like someone truly understood him. But there were still questions he couldn't shake. Emily was an enigma, a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. She spoke freely about her travels, but when it came to her past, she was vague and evasive. Jack could tell she was hiding something, but he didn't push her. Not yet. As the morning turned to afternoon, they decided to explore the island together. They wandered through the narrow streets of the village, stopping to admire the ancient architecture and the stunning views of the sea. Emily was a captivating guide, pointing out hidden spots and telling him stories about the island's history. They ended up at a secluded beach, where the waves lapped gently against the shore. The sun was high in the sky, casting a warm, golden light over everything. Jack felt a sense of contentment that had been elusive for so long. They sat on the sand, side by side, watching the waves roll in. For a while, they didn't speak, just enjoyed the peaceful silence. But Jack could feel the tension building, the unspoken questions hanging in the air. Finally, he turned to her. "Emily, I feel like there's a lot you're not telling me." She looked at him, her expression unreadable. "What do you mean?" "I don't know," he said, searching for the right words. "It's just, you're an amazing person, and I feel this connection between us. But there's something you're not saying, something you're holding back." Emily sighed, looking out at the sea. "Jack, there are things about my life that are complicated. Things I'm not proud of, things I'm still trying to figure out. It's not that I don't want to tell you. It's just, it's hard." Jack reached out, taking her hand in his. "You don't have to tell me everything, not if you're not ready. But I want to know you, Emily. The real you." She turned to him, her eyes filled with a mix of emotions. "You will, Jack. I promise. Just give me time." Jack nodded, understanding the fear and uncertainty in her voice. "I can do that." They stayed on the beach for hours, talking, laughing, and just enjoying each other's company. As the sun began to set, casting a warm orange glow over the water, Jack realized something. He was falling for her. Hard. And despite the questions and the mystery surrounding her, he didn't care. He wanted to be with her, to protect her, to help her find whatever it was she was searching for. But as they made their way back to the village, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that their time on the island was running out. There was something in the air, a sense of foreboding that made his heart race. He didn't know what it was, but he knew one thing for sure. Whatever it was coming for them. Chapter 3. The Revelation. The following days passed in a blur of bliss and uncertainty. Jack and Emily grew closer, their connection deepening with each passing moment. They spent their days exploring the island, discovering hidden coves, and sharing secrets by the firelight. Jack found himself opening up in ways he hadn't in years, revealing parts of himself that he had long kept hidden. Emily was his confidant, his muse, and his lover. Everything he hadn't realized he was missing. But despite the happiness he felt in her presence, there was always a shadow looming in the back of his mind. Emily was still holding something back, something important. He could see it in her eyes, in the way she would sometimes look over her shoulder as if expecting someone to be there. It was as if she was constantly on edge, always waiting for the other shoe to drop. One evening, as they sat together on the deck of the Endeavor, watching the sun set over the horizon, Jack decided it was time to confront her. He couldn't go on pretending that everything was perfect when he knew it wasn't. "Emily," he began, his voice hesitant, "I need to know the truth." She turned to him, her expression wary. "What do you mean?" "You know what I mean," he said, his tone gentle but firm. "There's something you're not telling me. Something important." Emily sighed, her shoulders slumping in defeat. "I knew this day would come," she murmured, more to herself than to him. She looked out at the sea, her eyes distant. "Jack, there's so much you don't know about me. So much I've tried to leave behind. Tell me," he urged, his heart pounding. "I want to help you, but I can't do that if I don't know what's going on." She hesitated for a long moment, then finally, she began to speak. "I'm not just a travel writer," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm a journalist. Or at least, I was. I used to work in Eastern Europe, covering stories that most people didn't want to touch. Corruption, organized crime, human trafficking. The kind of things that can get you killed if you dig too deep." Jack listened, his mind racing as he tried to process what she was saying. "But why did you leave?" "Because I found something I wasn't supposed to find," she replied, her voice trembling. "I uncovered evidence of a major criminal organization operating across multiple countries. They were involved in everything from drug trafficking to arms smuggling to political assassinations. I was so close to exposing them, but they found out what I was doing. They threatened me, told me that if I didn't back off, they would kill me. Jesus, Emily, Jack breathed, his heart racing with fear for her. Why didn't you go to the authorities? I tried, she said, tears welling up in her eyes. But they had people on the inside. No matter where I turned, they were always one step ahead. I had no choice but to run. I've been on the run for months now, moving from place to place, trying to stay off their radar. But no matter where I go, they always find me. Jack felt a cold chill run down his spine. This was far worse than he had imagined. Emily, why didn't you tell me sooner? I could have helped you. I didn't want to drag you into this, she said, her voice breaking. You've already done so much for me, Jack. I couldn't ask you to risk your life for me. Jack reached out, pulling her into his arms. You don't have to ask, he whispered, holding her tightly. I'm not going to let anything happen to you. We'll figure this out together. Emily clung to him, her tears soaking into his shirt. I'm so sorry, Jack, she sobbed. I never meant to bring this into your life. Don't be sorry, he said, his voice firm. We'll get through this. I promise. They stayed like that for a long time, holding each other as the sun dipped below the horizon. Jack knew that their peaceful days on the island were over. The threat that had been lurking in the shadows had finally come to light, and there was no turning back now. But no matter what came next, he was determined to protect Emily, no matter the cost. Chapter 4. The Chase. The following morning, Jack and Emily packed their things and left the island. They knew they couldn't stay any longer. It was only a matter of time before the people hunting Emily caught up with them. They boarded the Endeavour and set sail, leaving the island behind as they headed for the open sea. For the next few days, they kept moving, never staying in one place for too long. They sailed along the coast, stopping only briefly to refuel and stock up on supplies. Jack was constantly on edge, always scanning the horizon for any sign of danger. Emily was quiet, her usual warmth and humor replaced by a tense, watchful silence. They both knew the danger they were in, but they didn't talk about it. Instead, they focused on staying one step ahead, always moving, always looking over their shoulders. But despite their efforts, the tension between them continued to build, the fear and uncertainty gnawing away at the fragile bond they had built. One night, as they were anchored off the coast of a small, uninhabited island, Jack decided they needed to talk. They couldn't keep running forever, and they needed a plan. We can't keep going like this, he said, breaking the silence that had settled over them. Emily looked up from where she was sitting, her eyes tired and sad. I know, she said softly, but I don't know what else to do, Jack. Every time I think we're safe, they find us. I don't know how to stop them. Jack sat down next to her, taking her hand in his. We'll figure something out, he said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. We can't do this alone, Emily. We need help. But who can we trust? She asked, her voice trembling. Everyone I thought I could trust is either dead or working for them. I don't know who to turn to. Jack was silent for a moment, thinking. Then, an idea began to form in his mind. What about your old contacts? He asked. The people you used to work with. There must be someone who can help us. Emily looked uncertain. Maybe, she said slowly. There are a few people I might be able to reach out to, but it's risky. If they're being watched, we don't have a choice, Jack said, his voice firm. We need to take the risk. If we keep running, they'll catch up to us eventually. But if we can find someone who can help us expose them, we might have a chance. Emily nodded, her expression determined. You're right, she said. I'll make some calls. But we need to be careful, Jack. If they find out what we're doing, it could be the end for both of us. Jack squeezed her hand, his heart pounding with fear and determination. We'll be careful, he promised. But we can't give up, Emily. We'll get through this together. The rest of the night was spent in tense anticipation as Emily made a series of encrypted calls to her old contacts. Jack watched as she spoke in low, urgent tones, his stomach knotting with anxiety. He knew they were taking a huge risk, but it was the only option they had left. By the time the sun began to rise, Emily had made contact with an old friend, a journalist named Max who had connections in the intelligence community. Max was willing to help, but they needed to meet in person. He arranged to meet them at a safe house in Turkey, a remote location where they could lay low and plan their next move. The journey to Turkey was fraught with tension. Jack and Emily were constantly on edge, watching for any sign that they were being followed. They took precautions, changing their route multiple times and using false identities to avoid detection. But despite their efforts, the fear that they were being watched never left them. When they finally arrived at the safe house, a small, nondescript building hidden away in the hills, they were both exhausted and on the brink of collapse. Max greeted them with a wary smile, his eyes sharp and assessing as he took in their haggard appearances. "You two look like you've been through hell," he said, ushering them inside. "But don't worry, you're safe here. For now." Jack and Emily exchanged a glance, both knowing that safety was a relative term. But they had no choice but to trust Max, at least for the time being. Inside, the safe house was sparsely furnished, with only the bare essentials. Max led them to a small living room where a map of Europe was spread out on the coffee table, covered in notes and markings. "We don't have much time," Max said, getting straight to the point. "The people you're up against are dangerous, and they've got resources that we can't match. But if we play this right, we might be able to take them down. Emily, I need everything you've got on them. Names, locations, anything that can help us build a case." Emily nodded, pulling out a flash drive from her bag. "It's all here," she said, handing it to Max. "But be careful, Max. These people are ruthless. They'll stop at nothing to protect their secrets." Max took the drive, his expression grim. "I know, but we're not going down without a fight." As Max began to review the information, Jack and Emily sat in tense silence, waiting for the verdict. The minutes dragged on, each one feeling like an eternity. Finally, Max looked up, his face pale but determined. "This is big," he said, his voice filled with a mix of awe and fear. "Bigger than I thought. But it's also our best shot at taking them down. We need to get this to the right people, fast." Jack felt a surge of hope, but it was quickly tempered by the reality of their situation. "How do we do that without getting ourselves killed?" Max's expression hardened. "We're going to have to move quickly and quietly. I've got a few contacts in the intelligence community who might be able to help, but we're going to have to be smart about this. One wrong move, and it's over." The next few days were a blur of planning and preparation. Max made contact with his connections, setting up a series of meetings in secure locations. Jack and Emily were constantly on the move, never staying in one place for long, always looking over their shoulders. The tension between them continued to build, the stress of their situation weighing heavily on both of them. But through it all, their bond remained strong. They were in this together, and no matter what happened, they knew they could count on each other. But as they prepared for their final move, the one that would either save them or lead to their deaths, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The sense of foreboding that had been growing in the back of his mind was becoming impossible to ignore. And then, just when they thought they were safe, everything went wrong. Chapter 5. The Final Gambit. It happened so fast that Jack barely had time to react. They were on their way to the final meeting, the one that would secure their safety and bring their enemies to justice, when the attack came. They were driving along a remote mountain road, the safe house still several miles away, when the first bullet shattered the windshield. Jack swerved the car, trying to keep control as more bullets rained down on them from above. The tires screeched on the asphalt as he veered off the road and into the trees, trying to find cover. "Get down!" he shouted, pulling Emily to the floor as the car came to a stop behind a large boulder. The sound of gunfire filled the air, deafening and terrifying. Jack's heart pounded in his chest as he fumbled for his gun, cursing himself for not being better prepared. Emily was shaking, her face pale with fear, but she didn't cry out. She knew better than to draw attention to herself. Jack could see the terror in her eyes, but there was also a steely determination that reminded him why he had fallen for her in the first place. "We need to move," he said, his voice tight with tension. "They're trying to flush us out." Emily nodded, her eyes wide with fear, but she didn't argue. Together, they crawled out of the car and into the cover of the trees, moving as quickly and quietly as they could. The gunfire continued, but it was sporadic now, as if their attackers were searching for them. They ran through the woods, dodging bullets and trying to stay out of sight. Jack's mind was racing, trying to come up with a plan, but the terrain was unfamiliar, and he had no idea how many attackers they were up against. Finally, they reached a small clearing, and Jack pulled Emily behind a large rock, his heart pounding in his chest. "We need to keep moving," he said, his voice low and urgent. "But we can't keep running forever. We need to find a way to fight back." Emily nodded, her eyes filled with determination. "I'm with you," she said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. They continued through the woods, keeping low and moving as quickly as they could. The sound of gunfire had faded, but Jack knew better than to think they were safe. Their attackers were still out there, waiting for the right moment to strike. Finally, they reached a small cave hidden among the trees. Jack led Emily inside, his heart racing as he scanned the area for any sign of danger. The cave was dark and damp, but it offered some protection, and for now, that was all they could ask for. They sat down on the cold, damp ground, their backs against the rough stone walls. Jack could feel his heart pounding in his chest, the adrenaline still coursing through his veins. He looked over at Emily, who was pale and shaking, but still holding on. "We need to figure out a plan," he said, his voice low and determined. "We can't keep running. We need to find a way to fight back." Emily nodded, her eyes filled with a fierce determination. "I'm with you," she said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "Whatever it takes." Jack reached out, taking her hand in his. "We'll get through this," he promised, his voice filled with conviction. Together, they spent the next few hours in the cave, resting and planning their next move. Jack knew they couldn't stay there forever, but they needed time to regroup and come up with a plan. They were outnumbered and outgunned, but they still had one advantage, the element of surprise. As the sun began to set, Jack made a decision. "We need to strike first," he said, his voice filled with determination. "We can't wait for them to come to us. We need to take the fight to them." Emily looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice trembling. Jack nodded, his expression grim. "It's our only chance," he said. "We need to catch them off guard. If we can take out their leader, the rest will scatter." Emily took a deep breath, then nodded. "Okay," she said, her voice steady. "Let's do this." They spent the next few hours preparing for the attack, gathering whatever weapons and supplies they could find. Jack was nervous, but he knew they had no other choice. It was either fight or die, and he wasn't ready to give up yet. Finally, as the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, they set out. The woods were quiet, the only sound the soft rustle of leaves underfoot. Jack's heart pounded in his chest as they moved silently through the trees, their eyes scanning the area for any sign of their attackers. They reached the edge of the clearing where their attackers had set up camp. Jack could see the men moving around, setting up for another day of hunting. His heart pounded in his chest as he signaled for Emily to stay low. They moved silently through the trees, inching closer to the camp. Jack's mind was racing, trying to come up with a plan. He knew they were outnumbered, but if they could take out the leader, the rest would scatter. Finally, they were close enough to see the leader, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a cruel smile and cold, calculating eyes. Jack knew instantly that this was the man who had been hunting them, the man who had been orchestrating the attack. He took a deep breath, then signaled to Emily. "Now," he whispered. They moved quickly, taking out the guards before they had a chance to react. The leader turned, his eyes widening in surprise as he saw them approaching. Jack didn't hesitate. He raised his gun and fired, hitting the leader square in the chest. The man stumbled back, his eyes wide with shock and pain. For a moment, Jack thought it was over, but then the leader reached into his coat and pulled out a gun. Jack's heart pounded in his chest as he raised his own gun. But before he could fire, Emily stepped forward, her own gun raised. "Drop it," she said, her voice cold and steady. The leader hesitated, then slowly lowered his gun. "You think you've won?" he sneered, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. "This isn't over. You'll never be safe." Jack stepped forward, his heart pounding with anger and fear. "Maybe," he said, his voice cold and determined, "but you won't live to see it." He pulled the trigger, and the leader fell to the ground, his eyes wide with shock. Jack felt a surge of relief, but it was quickly tempered by the knowledge that this was far from over. "We need to get out of here," he said, turning to Emily. "Now." They ran through the woods, their hearts pounding in their chests. Jack knew they had won a small victory, but the war was far from over. They still had enemies out there, and they would stop at nothing to find them. But as they reached the edge of the woods and saw the open road ahead, Jack felt a surge of hope. They had survived this far, and they would keep fighting. Together. Chapter 6. The Aftermath. They drove for hours, putting as much distance between themselves and the camp as possible. Jack's mind was racing, trying to come up with a plan. They had taken out the leader, but there were still others out there, and they would be coming for them. Finally, they reached a small town on the coast. It was quiet, almost deserted, the kind of place where no one asked questions. Jack pulled the car into a small, run-down motel and turned to Emily. "We'll stay here for the night," he said, his voice filled with exhaustion. "But we can't stay long. We need to keep moving." Emily nodded, her eyes filled with weariness. "I know," she said softly, "but we need to rest, Jack. We can't keep running like this." Jack sighed, knowing she was right. They were both exhausted, both physically and mentally. They needed to rest, to regroup, to come up with a new plan. They checked into the motel, the room small and dingy, but it didn't matter. They were safe, at least for now. Jack collapsed onto the bed, his body aching with exhaustion. Emily sat down beside him, her hand resting on his shoulder. "We'll get through this," she said, her voice filled with determination. "Together." Jack nodded, his heart swelling with emotion. He knew they still had a long way to go, but as long as they were together, he knew they could make it. They spent the next few days in the motel, resting and planning their next move. Jack made contact with Max, who was relieved to hear they were still alive. Max had managed to get the information they needed to the right people, and an investigation was underway. But it would take time, and they needed to stay hidden until it was safe to come out. The days passed slowly, the tension between them growing as they waited for news. But through it all, their bond remained strong. They had been through so much together, and no matter what happened, they knew they could count on each other. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Max called with good news. The investigation was going well, and the people who had been hunting them were being taken down, one by one. It was only a matter of time before they were safe. Jack felt a surge of relief, but it was tempered by the knowledge that they would never truly be free. There would always be someone out there, someone looking for revenge. But as he looked at Emily, her eyes filled with love and determination, he knew it didn't matter. They had each other, and that was enough. As they left the motel and drove off into the sunset, Jack felt a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. They had survived, and they would keep surviving, no matter what came next. The road ahead was uncertain, but as long as they were together, he knew they could face anything. Now that the story has come to an end, do you think Jack and Emily can truly build a new life together, despite all they've been through? Or will their pursuers catch up with them again? Share your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed the book, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel. There's plenty more thrilling stories ahead.